gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Ashwini Vethakan. This week's episode of Talking Business is a special one as we wrap up and count down the best interviews for 2021. Professor Suranjit Suniviratna, consultant in clinical immunology and allergy at the Royal Free Hospital and University College, London.
But Suranjit, you're supposed to have the second dose in order for the vaccine to be effective. Now, how would it work if you give everybody just one dose? How long before they are susceptible to the virus once again?
Very good question, Anush. And because I think there's been a lot of debate about this same question. Lots of people have come in and into the process. Now we have to remember we are dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with more than 50,000 cases per day. That is, if you just put it into context, if I put it into context, there are more than 50,000 patients per day in the UK. And the problem is, if you have a lot of cases, could account in number of patients getting severe disease. And if you get severe disease, you have to go into hospital. It's going to affect the hospital sort of uptake, and it's going to affect the working of hospitals. Actually, the NHS can be affected very badly because other patients also will be admitted. So when you look at that in that context, now we know that a single dose of vaccine does protect to some extent. So from a public health perspective, it was important to protect as many people as soon as possible. It is true as a scientist, when you look at the information, the ideal picture would have been to follow the exact protocol as laid by the phase 3 clinical trials. That is what we have been taught to do. That is what we advise people to do. But I think circumstances overtook the process here, where the immunization sort of authority in the UK had to come in and had to make decisions because there is not enough vaccines to go around.
Professor, could you outline any variants that the currently approved vaccines don't cover? And should we be on more alert about the black fungus that is now found in India?
Yes, so about the variants. Now, viruses want to multiply and spread from cell to cell, person to person. When they multiply rapidly. They would have small changes in their genes. A lot of the changes are of no effect. The change, it doesn't cause any effect. Some of the changes are neutral. They don't have any, there's no clinical effect. Some of the changes are significant. They have clinical effect and they will influence one of 5 things, which I will explain. They can influence the transmission, the severity of the disease, the diagnosis, the treatment, and the vaccines. Those are the 5 things that a variant can affect. So a lot of the variants that we have come across so far that have been called variants of concern. So there are variants of concern, there are variants of interest. Initially, they are called, if they are some clinical relevant, they're called variants of interest. There's a definite definition for that. And then they are upgraded to variants of concern. So we have 5 variants of concern in the UK at the moment. And many of those increase transmission, and about 2 or 3 increase disease severity. So transmission, it spreads a lot. Number of cases increase, and when number of cases increase, the number of people going to hospital increase, and then it can put a big pressure on the sort of hospital sector. So that is why you really want to keep those variants under control. Like the Indian variant, there are 3 subvariants that can increase transmission. Everyone wants to know what is the effect on vaccine responses. And that has been looked at. I mean, studies are continuing, real world data is coming, laboratory data is there. And what has the sort of summary information we have at the moment is the variant we have to be careful about is the South African variant. it's the variant of, when I say South African, it means it originated in South Africa, not that it's only present in South Africa. It was first detected, originated first detected in South Africa, now it has spread to many, many countries. The South African variant reduces the neutralization, that is the antibody neutralization reduced to a fair level by the South African variant. And we have real world data which indicates that the South African variant, people given the vaccine, it's less effective against the South African variant. When it comes to the UK variant, the Kent variant, the Indian variant, the Brazilian variant, it is less affected. So the UK and the Indian variant, they have done studies, less studies in the Indian variant, and they found that so far the vaccines are effective. But the issue is that we don't want to get further more and more variants coming in, because at some stage you might find that it has a critical effect on vaccine immunity. And that is an area that we have to watch carefully and not get into that tricky situation. Now, companies are adjusting their vaccines, they're changing their vaccine to be able to handle these variants, because most of the variants have some common mutations, not all, but there are some common important mutations. So if they can change their vaccines in such a way, all the major manufacturers are doing that, then we would be able to give a sort of vaccine targeted variant as a third booster, or we can combine a number of different, as we say, constructs, different parts so that it can deal with different variants. And the vaccine manufacturers are doing the studies at the moment.
Founder and lead designer of House of Lonali, Lonali Rodrigo. Lonali, upcycling fashion has been a trend for a while now. What is the average Sri Lankan buyer's attitude towards upcycled fashion?
So to take our experience, because we started our brand back in 2012. By that time, definitely upcycling was extremely new word. I wouldn't say that it was a new practice, because I think our grandparents era, they kind of upcycled, reused did all these kind of new models back then. Definitely they didn't throw anything. At the same time, in Buddhism it says you have to use an old piece of cloth to make the robe, a monk's robe, or after that they say that to use it as mix it with clay and use it for your walls. So upcycling, reusing, recycling has been a process within the societies, but these are pretty much new words. So back in 2012 when we started, definitely it was a new word. People didn't know about it. So we started to educate a lot of people what the process was. So when we started to educate, obviously it was quite confusing. A lot of people knew recycling, but not what exactly upcycling is. Upcycling is you take waste, add value, and bring it back to a new life. So when you say the word waste, a lot of people took a step back and they didn't want to really purchase something made out of waste because of the impression that they had on waste. But I think eventually people realized, right now the consciousness has increased, the awareness has increased. We are talking about sustainability, and it's also becoming a trend. So making a trend means that people know about it, people want to do it, want to kind of purchase, be a part of the movement. So therefore, I think right now, it's something that is much more positive than before. And in 2019, it was one of the top 3 trends, not just in fashion, but also in furniture, architecture, product designing. So I think it's much better impression on upcycling and much better awareness right now.
And on that note, we'll be going in for a short break. Welcome back as we wrap up and count down the best interviews for 2021. Naturalist and taxonomist Rohan Pethiagoda. Rohan, the Sri Lankan government recently announced that it would be the first country in the world to produce 100% organic agriculture. What are the consequences of this?
I don't know whether this is a program that's going to be sustainable. I'd be astonished if it was. I think it's going to be a massive failure, and either this government or a future government will backtrack on it because it simply can't be done. You have to bear in mind that we have 1 million rice farmers in Sri Lanka. I'll just take two sectors, right? We're not going to count vegetables and rubber and oil palm and all the rest of it, and coconut. Two sectors, rice and tea. 1 million rice farmers, 400,000 tea smallholders. Now, those 400,000 tea smallholders have to become compliant with the organic system. Now, let me just quickly tell you what this involves. Organic agriculture has much lower yields than conventional agriculture. Everybody accepts that. That's why they have conventional agriculture, because it yields more. So typically 30% more tea leaves will be produced by conventional agriculture than organic. So you take a loss when you shift to organic, however well you do the organic. That's part of the culture of organics. Now, the problem is, when you take that loss in production, you have to make up for it by getting a premium price for it, by getting an organic certified label. Now, assuming there is world market demand for the 300 million kilos of organic tea that Sri Lanka is planning to produce every year, which I doubt, then you have to get each of those 400,000 smallholders certified. This means that each of those smallholders, and remember, many of these people are living at the edge of poverty. They're not the best educated. They're not the people who got the most capital in this country. They're poor people, eking out a living, a subsistence existence from their tea smallholding of several perches. Now you tell them, here's the SLS standard, SLS 1324, which you have to now comply with. 85 pages of small print, most of it completely contrary to science, but let's leave that to one side. 85 pages of small print that they have to now comply with. In addition to that, they have to get an international organic certification, each of these 400,000 people. And that international organic certification is given by 7 multinational NGOs, so-called non-profit organizations that operate in Sri Lanka. 6 of them are European, 1's Australian. So this is the new colonialism. These people who come from overseas now dictate how we should do our agriculture. To get their certification, each one costs about $300 per year. 60,000 rupees from a smallholder is a lot of money. That's 2 months' income has to go to paying the certification fee to some foreign people who come here and issue the certificate from 400,000 people. Look at the cost of that. It's completely impractical. And if one of those people produces tea by cheating, by not doing it organically and gets caught, it affects the whole reputation of the Sri Lanka organic brand. So this is a program that really hasn't been thought out clearly by anyone. I have no idea whose brainchild it was, but it wasn't a clever idea. And I have no doubt that the government will backtrack on it. And it's not to say that there's any scientific underpinnings for this either. What's the problem you're trying to fix by introducing this organic system nationally? I don't see that. It's just absolutely bizarre as far as I'm concerned.
Executive Vice President and Group Chief Information Officer for JAT Holdings, Dr. Ramesh Shanmuganathan. Slascom envisions a $5 billion industry by 2025, creating new jobs and tech startup firms. How do you view this vision?
So, as I said, I think Slascom probably has done its part in terms of taking progressive steps in terms of establishing a brand, in terms of island of ingenuity, which is good. But for us to get to $5 billion in terms of exports, there are a lot more that we need to do than branding, right? So I think that is where we need to take cues from countries like Israel, Ireland, even countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Dubai, in terms of looking at what is our USP, right? Because we can't be in India because we don't have the supply side of the equation in terms of IT skills and competency. So we got to be a niche player. So if that is what we are kind of envisioning to do, we also then need to look at what is that we need to build, because Slascom alone won't be able to achieve that vision, right? So that is where I think if you really look at countries like Ireland to Estonia to Israel to Dubai, or even Singapore, the government itself and a lot of the stakeholders have come together in realizing the dream of making the country technology hub, right? So that is where I feel we are lacking. Though in some parts we have a vision and we are doing our part, but it is really not making that impact that we wish to have had from a global point of view, right? So I think that is where I feel most of the stakeholders have to come together and have a clear top-down drive in terms of achieving their vision, right? Similar to Singapore and Dubai. Like if you take like if you look at San Francisco, right, or even in US, it's the Silicon Valley is more in terms of like a bottom-up kind of a growth, right? Because that economy and how it kind of spanned or lends itself for a bottom-up way of growing that to become a technology hub. But from a Sri Lankan context, given where we are, we also need a bit of a top-down approach in terms of driving it, like what Dubai did, like a smart city, smart nation, what Singapore did in terms of, the smart Singapore, the digital Singapore kind of initiative, so that you also then the government leads a critical mass of activities which incubates, attracts investment, attracts multinationals, and also kind of then lays the foundation for the country to kind of then piggyback on that and leapfrog, right? So I feel that is what is lacking today. So obviously with the current government, I think there's a lot of initiatives on the way on the digital Sri Lanka and stuff. So if that starts building traction, you will also see mainstream players, multinationals also wanting to get involved in those projects. Then you will obviously see the talent getting kind of developed. So it will have a kind of an impact in terms of creating that avalanche effect what we need for the country.
President partner of FJ&G Deserum Attorneys-in-Law, Ayomi Aluwihara. So who can invest in the port city?
As I mentioned, the key primary object is to attract foreign investment that is raised from outside of Sri Lanka. And this is thought to be in national interest. So it is primarily foreign investors. However, the provisions in the Port City Act do anticipate or do allow for local investment that can be in the form of the consideration paid for the lease of land. It is anticipated that foreign parties that engage in business in the port city will need land. The land may be leased by local investors, i.e. businesses in Sri Lanka. The Port City Act anticipates also that once land is leased, that these local investors will, together with a foreign investor or a consortium of foreign investors, seek approval from the Commission to carry on business in the port city. So to answer your question, primarily it's foreign investment, but there is provision for local investment by way of the leases, land leases, and of course, local investment will also be required for telecommunication and other utility services and infrastructure within the port city.
And on that note, we'll be going in for a short break.
You love the feeling of being renewed. To stay beautiful every single day. To breathe just like we do, because you are truly delicate. Protecting the ones who've been with us through the years. With Sayalac Care, the only wood coating that truly protects you. Sayalac Wood Coatings from JAT.
Welcome back as we wrap up and count down the best interviews for 2021. Director of Corporate Affairs at MAS Holdings, Rajita Jayasuriya. Now you work in many areas. What are the pitfalls that you've come across when maintaining corporate governance in Sri Lanka?
From a country point of view, I think many, because policies are generally driven by political intentions. I don't even know if it's controversial to say this, but it's very rarely that corporates or the public is consulted on the intentions or the need for the country or the people itself when policies are drafted and implemented. And from there comes the inability sometimes, especially in the public sector, for people to make decisions and stand by them, because there is so much of they'll be reprimanded, or there'll be implications to them continuing in their journey. So people are scared to make decisions. And then most public sector employees are not really well remunerated either, and that leads to then corruption setting in. So from a governance point of view, there are so many issues that we need to first think about. How do we empower people? How do we remunerate people really well from a public sector point of view? Then how do we bring in good structured legal policies, or corporate governance policies, or country policies, policies that really help the people and the country, and empower our people to really work towards upholding these policies. This also sort of lands true with the corporate sector. I think with the downfall that we saw in the financial collapse in the late 2000s, 2008, a lot of companies understood the governance, the importance of governance. And most companies made great strides in bringing in place good policies, structured, robust policies around corporate governance. While there is a great move towards bringing in better governance even in the corporate world, we still I think that there's still room for a lot of improvement. We need to bring in more awareness. We must emphasize on the importance of ethics, the importance of being transparent, and also empower people to speak up and call out when they see wrong being committed. So very good, robust whistleblower policies are also important in order to maintain a robust system when it comes to governance.
Representative for the World Health Organization in Sri Lanka, Dr. Razia Pense.
Razia, when could nations such as us expect to receive the vaccine? Because there are a lot of conflicting reports about this.
So there are a couple of things in terms of accessing the vaccine doses through the COVAX facility. One is the availability of the candidate vaccines. That means availability of efficacious and safe vaccine that has passed through a stringent regulatory authority and also has been listed for emergency use by WHO. And as you would have followed, that multiple candidate vaccines have been approved by many countries with stringent regulatory authorities, and WHO issued the emergency use listing for one of the vaccines. That's the Pfizer vaccine. And as these candidate vaccines are approved, these will be picked up by the facility. And what we are expecting is that by the end of first quarter of 2021, the vaccine doses would started to be distributed to the countries who have signed up for COVAX. There is an effort by the facility and by WHO to look into options for an early rollout starting sometime mid to late February, but that would depend on availability of those vaccine doses that are there and readiness of the countries. So for a country like Sri Lanka, what would be important is what the COVAX facility would be looking into is the readiness of the country to roll out the vaccine. Because what the facility is aiming at, that once the vaccine doses are sent to the countries, they should be immediately deployed, that there should be no idle doses lying in the country.
President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Salia Kiris. The US Department of State's Country Report on Human Rights Practices in Sri Lanka notes significant human rights issues in the country. In your opinion, what are the most pressing issues being addressed?
Well, I think the Bar Association also has addressed this issue on torture and the need to curb custodial torture. That is, I think, foremost. And day in and day out, we hear of reports or we see videos sometimes of police officers beating up people. And I think that is one issue which needs to be addressed. Coupled with that, there is the issue of custodial deaths, where there have been instances where people in custody have been killed, and the police have sometimes offered an explanation saying that they have been killed while they have been going to be taken to search for weapons, so on. The Supreme Court has in several key cases held that the state has a duty to protect those in their custody. So I think where human rights is concerned, that is one key factor. Similarly, I think the need to protect the right to dissent is absolutely important. One needs to ensure that the freedom of speech and expression is protected, and that the right to dissent, the freedom of peaceful assembly, those are protected. COVID-19 has brought with it certain difficulties, but we know that whatever difficulties are there, still people have a right to dissent. The freedom of expression is also absolutely important. And of course, when you talk of human rights, the rule of law is absolutely important. It is necessary that the authorities ensure the existence of the rule of law. And so the rule of law will cover a whole number of issues: equality, equal protection of the law, the applicability of the law to everyone. All these are covered by the rule of law. And the rule of law is contrasted with the rule of men. So it is said, if it is the rule of law, there is consistency. Whereas if there in the absence of a rule of law, then you have communities, countries being governed by whims and fancies of persons. And that is not good for a society. So that is why the preservation of the rule of law, and part of the rule of law is preservation of fundamental rights that must be protected.
And that's all the time we have for you this week. We would like to take this opportunity to thank all our viewers and sponsors for supporting us through 2021. Thanks for watching and a Happy New Year.